This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and...
Not the other one. Hello and welcome to another episode of Partners in Crime, number 80, I think, by my count. Mr. Dawes not here again this week. He is currently faffing about in Windsor. More on that later. So I'm joined again by the wonderful Mr. Adrian Hobart. Hello, Adrian.
Hi, nice to be with you again.
It was good, actually. Last week we were at the Morecambe and Vice Crime Writing Festival. You jumped in at the last minute then. You've done so again this week. You're becoming something of a saviour for us.
It's the first time in my life I think I've been regarded as one of those, but yeah, it's a great pleasure. And it's a little bit different this week, isn't it? Because we haven't got the rapport with an audience, and the jokes won't get the laughs that we did last time. Some of them did anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, hopefully they'll still get the laughs, we just won't hear them. But we had a great week last week at Morecambe and Vice. If you haven't heard last week's episode, do go and listen to that. Recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Midland Hotel in Morecambe. It was brilliant fun. Just a brilliant weekend in general, Adrian, wasn't it?
Oh, it was superb. Yeah, what a setting, and such lovely people. It's great to be around like-minded souls, isn't it? And they're passionate about crime and so generous with their thoughts and their praise and their, even their gifts in your case.
Yes, there is that. Yeah. Thank you very much to the listeners who did bring gifts and things for us. It was very, very kind. I've not going to lie, I've already eaten the cake and drunk the green tea. But there we are. And lovely to bump into, as you say, so many authors. I mean, just off the top of my head, had lovely chats with Matt Brolly, Paul Burston, Leif Francis, Derek Farrell, Lilia Sigurdardottir. I'm going to go with that and pretend that's the Icelandic pronunciation. Leslie Thompson, numerous people and listeners as well to the podcast. It was great to meet so many of them and put names to faces and have so many people come up and say hi, and the fact that they love the show. One of which has got in touch with us this week, Helen Weir. Hello to you. Had a lovely chat as well in the lobby of the Midland Hotel. She says, "Hi guys, following your recent discussions about the percentage of female readers of crime fiction being higher than that of men, I was more aware this weekend at Morecambe and Vice of the audience makeup. Scanning the sessions I attended, I have to say the majority of attendees were indeed female. This is something I would never have thought about previously. I'm happy to be in the majority for a change. Cracking live podcast, by the way. Mr. Dawes was much missed, but hope all's okay." So, that was something I spotted as well, the fact that it is, generally speaking, quite a female-heavy thing, really. Crime reading, I suppose, particularly. I think you get the idea that the authors are kind of more or less a 50-50 split, but the audience last week at Morecambe and Vice was quite female-heavy.
Yeah, I got that impression. I mean, it certainly was. I think it could have been up to 90%, because there were a lot of the male members of the audience were actually authors. Yeah. So, I think there were probably, you could count on one hand the number of guys who'd gone there, for pleasure and as, members of the public as opposed to, invitees. So, yeah, it was very, very striking.
I survey my readers each year, actually, and I think 80-something% of them are women. So it kind of fits in with the industry norms, I suppose. It's not something that's necessarily peculiar to Morecambe and Vice. Which, fantastic festival. If you do get a chance, any listeners, to get up there next year, I think they have penciled in the 13th and 14th of September next year, so a week or two earlier. So hopefully it won't be quite as wet and windy as it was this year up at Morecambe. And we do have the early makings of an invitation to come back. So hopefully, if you manage to somehow miss Partners in Crime live this year, you might be able to catch it next year, again at Morecambe and Vice, and hopefully with plenty more in between as well, because it was brilliant fun. It seemed to go down really, really well. We had a nice little boost in new listeners as well, and people who attended the session because they had weekend passes and hadn't heard of Partners in Crime or hadn't listened to it, and who were pleasantly surprised and really enjoyed it. So hopefully we've got ourselves some new listeners too.
Great. No, absolutely. And, it was such a pleasure to do my first one in front of a crowd like that. It was fantastic.
That's what you call a baptism of fire, I think, isn't it?
Well, a little bit, yeah. But, I've had, in my sort of game of broadcasting, I'm not unused to it, but in the sense, probably my biggest bit of training was I spent 7 years running around on tour buses around Cambridge in front of live audiences. So it's not something I'm sort of completely averse to, but it's a long time since I did it to that extent. So and it's amazing. Some tours you could absolutely, everything works, and it felt like that on the stage in Morecambe. But other times, stony faces, all of your jokes don't work, all of the information doesn't get across, and occasionally you upset people. There was an occasion when on my lower deck so you can imagine it's a double-decker bus, it's open to the elements on the top, and what I hadn't realised was that about 20 Carmelite nuns had got on board the lower deck during one of our stops. And I happened to point out that there was a house of ill repute on the route round. And so I walked down to these stony faces and crossed arms at the next stop. So that's ingrained on my soul.
Brilliant. Love it. Which is kind of, you start to get a bit of a reputation for yourself. You talked about leprechaun erotica last week at Morecambe and Vice.
Yeah.
We'll leave that there. We'll let the listeners go back and listen to the last episode so they can see what that was all about. But you're right, so much could have gone wrong, and so much did go wrong, but kind of behind the scenes stuff. I guess Bob, not being able to make it at the last minute and was going to draft you in and talk you into it over a few espresso martinis the night before. Trying to get all the equipment set up in the space of 15 minutes between the events, and then kicking it off by playing the wrong theme tune at the start. So we when I first
got it all out of the way beforehand.
When I first started saying those lines, the welcome to Partners in Crime, I was crying inside, but it worked, and that's the beauty of live, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And 50% of that success is down to an audience. So
absolutely, it is. Yeah, definitely. And while we're talking about live and the fact that Bob isn't here, if you do want to see him, he's currently appearing in Alan Ayckbourn's 10 Times Table, which at the time of recording and at the time of going live is at the Theatre Royal in Windsor. It then goes off to Sheffield, Southport, Newcastle, Malvern, Eastbourne, Guildford and Bath. He will still be here doing the shows. He's not necessarily back to back with all of them, and a few of them he's drivable, and we can do things down the line and all sorts of stuff like that. But Bob will be somewhat part time over the next few weeks, but I'm sure, Adrian, you're more than happy to step into his shoes. At least I'm putting you on the spot now and telling you that's what's going to happen.
Fine. Well, I'm on holiday for 3 months come next week, so feel free to fill my diary for me.
Lovely. One thing I wanted to talk about this week was a book that was recommended at Morecambe and Vice by a few people to me, actually. Enough so that I got out the app on my phone there and then and ordered it, and it was ready and waiting for me when I got home. It's M.W. Craven's The Puppet Show, which has had quite a lot of attention and quite a lot of people pushing it. And I've somehow managed to completely miss it. And I don't know how, but it is absolutely brilliant in terms of compelling characters, in terms of an intriguing setting up on the Lake District, the Fells in Cumbria. Wonderful setting, wonderful characters, brilliantly written. I get the feeling, I'm only about a third of the way through, but I get a feeling that Mr. Craven has a similarly dark sense of humour to me, so I'm very much enjoying that. That's the Puppet Show by M.W. Craven. I won't go too far into the plot, for a couple of reasons, mainly because I'm only a third of the way through, and secondly because it's actually quite a difficult plot to describe, and that's not normally a good thing with books, but with this it actually is. It's best that I just say read it if you haven't. I know that sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but genuinely I think any way I try to describe it would not do the book justice. It's definitely the best crime book I've read in a long time, and thank you to everyone at Morecambe and Vice who recommended that to me, The Puppet Show by M.W. Craven. That's my
fantastic.
My book recommendation of the week. Now that I'm actually getting a bit of time to read some fiction, which is that I've basically sorted my life out. But you spotted a little something in the news this week that you wanted to bring up, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was in the Daily Telegraph, or the Telegraph as they now prefer to be known, and it was an extraordinary article. They've done one of these things that we journalists now have as a tool, the Freedom of Information request. is feared by every organisation known to man, but is really, really useful when you're trying to dig around to find out the scale of a problem. And what they were digging around was, have detectives... they were trying to find out the reasons why detectives are suddenly a rare commodity and why the police are struggling to fulfil detective roles, to the extent that 1 in 5 are currently, in the UK at least, unfilled. And it went into such depth, to the extent that it was quite scary, some of the figures. I split my time between where I am at the moment, which is in Staffordshire, and sometimes I return to Cheshire. And those two counties alone, I think it was Staffordshire, had 42% vacancies, or drop in numbers in the last 10 years in terms of detectives, and Cheshire's was in the 30s somewhere, which is extraordinary. And it turns out that some of the explanations that are being put forward, one of them is around the way that TV is now depicting detectives, in that they're a lot more problematic, a lot more troubled than they used to be. The reality of policing is what people expect to find in a TV drama now, and actually it's making it less fashionable or exciting for young police officers to go into the detective ranks. So I just wondered whether we should take some of the blame as crime writers for that change.
Well, this is something that's come up in different guises quite a bit, actually, over the course of the time we've been doing the podcast. The links between real life and crime fiction, and how much does crime fiction have a role to play. And that's something we do enjoy exploring. We've looked at things like the Netflix documentaries and dramatisations of real life crimes. I think the Millie Dowler one was on recently on TV, I think, wasn't it? And was that on Martin Clunes, I think, on ITV?
Yeah, that's right.
And we talked about that. Is it? I think it depends on how things are structured. I think if you're looking at things from the point of view of the victims, rather than glamorising the killers themselves with things like Ted Bundy tapes, I'm not entirely sure that was done in the best possible taste. This kind of leans into that, I think, when we're talking about how policing is portrayed, whether it's the action-packed Gene Hunt style, which, let's face it, isn't an accurate reflection of policing. Much of policing on TV isn't an accurate reflection, and I think there's part of me that says if people are going into policing and going into detective roles because of what they see on TV, they're probably not the people you necessarily want to have in those roles anyway. So there is part of me that thinks, is it perhaps weeding out people that shouldn't be there and that are doing it for the wrong reasons? I don't know. It's a tricky one, but it doesn't help the fact that numbers have dropped and that there is actually a recruitment issue at the moment, which is interesting because I remember not so long ago they were talking about fast-tracking people through university and things like that, and getting police officers in from outside the force to be parachuted straight into CID. What happened with that? Surely we should be flooded with extra people. We shouldn't be sort of struggling for them now.
Well, yeah, I think that's, according to the report at least, that's still on the agenda, to take graduates straight into detective roles. Now, previously they've had to do 2 years on the beat, which might have put them off a bit. But the actual starting salary isn't really competitive with a lot of other starting roles. If you're talking about what they call the milk round, going around universities where accountancy firms are offering vast sums of money, probably more than their parents were earning, that kind of stuff. So that might be a mitigating factor, but also I think that today's generation, my eldest son has just gone into university, and I don't think for a moment that he'd ever consider the police force, but knowing what that generation, his generation, is like, they're very, very choosy, and what they don't want is to go into an environment, I think, where they're going to get overly criticised. Now you can imagine if you're a graduate going straight into CID as a DC, detective constable, it would be such a difficult environment where you've got all these established figures, possibly some of them quite mature with attitudes and approaches similar to DCI Culverhouse. You know, a bit of rough and tumble from
nice
Frank.
little mention there.
Frank Vine. Yes, thank you. But, you know, it's that sort of dynamic between established coppers who've seen it all, done it all, and a generation some have described as snowflakes, but certainly not prepared to take the sort of roughing up and buffing up, if you like, that used to go on in workplaces around, you know, the times when I went into the workforce at the BBC. You were routinely given terrible things to do, or just to show your mettle. And I don't think that generation is going to be like that, and I think that's a big change for the police. I think there was an interesting couple of other factors they threw in there. Money was one of them. So to become a detective constable, you've got to spend 2 years in training or take 2 big courses on top of becoming a PC. You've done your 2 years on the beat, and then you've got to take 2 courses, and yet your money's still the same. In fact, it's probably worse because there's no overtime in CID compared to beat officers who get paid overtime, and that could be a 10% differential. So a lot of cultural factors involved here, a lot of financial ones, and then there's the other factor, which is that the nature of what they're investigating has changed considerably, it seems. So, you know, your typical burglaries and, you know, bank robberies and all that sort of thing that used to feature in 70s cop shows are far less likely to be the thing you're investigating. It's going to be following data trails or hours and hours of CCTV analysis and things like that. So it's a lot less getting out of the office. It's about managing data, and that is something that perhaps doesn't appeal to people.
It is, yeah. And I you touched on the kind of the starting salary thing there as well. I mean, it has to be realistic. It has to be, I guess, competitive. But again, there's a part of me that thinks, is this a job that people go into for money? Should it be a job that people go into for money? I mean, it's got to pay its way, of course, but I think kind of like nursing, I think with policing, there's a part of me that says you want people who are there because they feel a compulsion to do that job, which is fair enough if we've got enough people coming through that feel that compulsion. But the fact that that is clearly dropping, I think probably, as you touched on, leads to something societal there. Why do not as many people want to take those caring roles, those unforgiving roles that perhaps don't pay so well but have an important role in society? Are people as bothered now about having an important role in society as they used to? Are we less caring as a nation? It's again, you know, fiction and what have you, it all ties into society and politics, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, and one further factor to add to all that, this report suggests that into successful convictions through the courts have dropped from 15% to 8%, which is pretty stark. So you go through all this trouble, and you might not be able to stand it up in court. And I think, you know, you've written about this in your novels, about the problem of a decent barrister is going to expose any shortcoming in the way that the case is conducted and investigated. And with the pressure on numbers, a typical CID unit being 5 people, well, nowadays it's normally 4 because there's always a shortage. They're having to take some shortcuts just to get through the work and making mistakes, or at least that's the way the jury or the court might see it. So again, you know, that's quite off-putting. And then one final factor they mention is the fact that it's the sort of job you can take home with you, in the sense that, you know, you never, once you're on a case, it never leaves you, and you can work any hours needed to solve it. Whereas if you're a bobby on the beat, a police officer going around on the street, you knock off, you know, at a certain time, or you might do overtime and get rewarded for it. But nonetheless, although you might see things and do things that affect you, you're not having to live it day after day like you would with a case until it's solved. No,
that's right. Well, away from books and away from real life, something I spotted while I was browsing through the Irish Times, which of course I read from cover to cover every day, was an article by Peter Crawley entitled "On the Set of Dublin Murders, Tana French's crime novels come to TV." an article about the hotly anticipated adaptation of Tana French's Dublin Murder Squad novels, which has been made by the BBC in collaboration with Element Pictures and US broadcaster Stars. Now I'm going to read out a little bit about it because, it saves me actually doing any work. The article says, doing right by the vision of French's books, which combine vivid details of Ireland's recent social history from boom through bust with eerie tinges of the supernatural, brings its own challenges. In the Woods is set in 2006 when the grim discovery of a 13-year-old girl's body on an altar brings the detective partners Rob Riley, which is a name change from the books, and Cassie Maddox to an archaeological site soon to be bulldozed to provide space for a needless motorway. The grimy underbelly of the Celtic tiger also dredges up an unresolved past. 21 years earlier, 3 children went missing in the same woods. 2 were never found. Narrated by Rob, the connection between events first resisted invites devastating consequences. The likeness, which centres on Cassie, is still more gothic and fantastical, sending her undercover to inhabit a Georgian house in County Wicklow, another potent site earmarked for soulless development. So very much seeing another side of Ireland through this series and through these books, and what we're usually sold, I suppose, and something which is going to become even more interesting with the border issues which are cropping up there now due to the B word. But that's due to hit BBC One on Monday, October the 14th at 9 p.m. And there's a double bill on RTE1 in Ireland at 9:35 on Wednesday, October the 16th. So that's the Dublin Murders new television series, which does look very good indeed. That's my my TV recommendation, I think.
Fantastic. Well, with that sort of level of credibility behind the producers and the level of investment that both companies would have put into it, I'm sure it'll be excellent.
Yeah, definitely. Have you had a chance to get any reading done since we met at Morecambe and Vice?
Yes, I have actually, and I like you. I'm a third of the way through, and I'm sort of, I suppose I've been inspired to really sink into or reach into the wealth of crime fiction and do some catching up, because as I said last week, and one of the problems I have is if I'm doing audiobooks and I'm still doing my legionary stories, that requires an awful lot of my reading time, either reading ahead or just making sure I'm ready for the next session. So it's quite difficult to find the time. But for pleasure, I'm dipping into Ian Rankin's last novel, which was In a House of Lies, which came out last year, and the new one coming out in November, I think it is, called West Wind. And what I'm finding interesting with Ian Rankin, obviously he is described, variously as the king or the godfather of modern crime writing in Britain, all that sort of stuff. How he's dealing with the main character who's retired in Rebus, and sharing the limelight with Siobhan Clarke, who worked with him for years and is now in the police force and he's outside it. Really interesting dynamic, that. And I remember him on the BBC a few years ago saying, I'm going to have to retire him now. He's got to that stage and he's got COPD or emphysema, if you prefer, and his health's failing and he just can't carry on. I'm going to have to figure out a way of carrying on the character without him being active. And I think he's done it really well. I mean, I've not finished it by any means, and I'm sort of a third of the way through, but I think that it's a really interesting dynamic. And also there's this element of what I find so interesting is watching my parents when they retired and feeling that they've sort of dropped out of their active role in life and redefining themselves, going through a character where they've been so defined by their job. And in a sense, that's probably me too, in the sense that in 6 months' time, I won't work for the organisation I've worked for 23, 24 years. How do you redefine yourself? So I think it's speaking to me on those levels. Yeah.
It's interesting because this is something that I've been thinking about with my Night and Culverhouse series, which you know well through narrating them. It's struck me that Jack Culverhouse, even though we know he's getting on a bit, he's from the old school. I worked out fairly recently that he joined CID 38 years ago. which is about twice the length of the service that you're actually even allowed to do, whether you wanted to or not. So it's something that nobody else has spotted. And in fact, I think when I started writing the books, he should have already been retired by then anyway, when I started writing them. But thankfully, nobody has spotted this, or they might have done, and they might just be forgiving me. And but then again, there are lots of detectives who, in fiction, who go on well beyond their means. I know Ian Rankin tries to make them as realistic as possible, and obviously has Rebus retiring. It's something I've had in my mind as well, what I'm going to do and when I'm going to pull that plug and think, actually, it's getting beyond the realms of just stretching it a bit for fiction. And this guy's been knocking about for 60 years, and he should be about 100 odd. So it's interesting actually. It's something that's been going through my mind quite a bit recently while I've been planning the ninth Night in Culver House novel, which I'm currently working on. So yeah, thought I'd throw that one
selfish
in there.
Reasons. All I'm going to say is don't retire him too soon, because I'm just enjoying doing the narration on them. So take it to 12. That would be great. And then,
yes, there'll be plenty more to come. But again, I've been looking at what Ian Rankin's been doing, and there are ways of definitely keeping the characters in there without them necessarily being active serving police officers. So there's definitely life in the series yet. So yeah, don't worry about that. You've got a job for years to come. I wouldn't worry.
Good. As long as I'm still active. Before I get COPD.
Yeah. On that note, I think I'm about done for this week. Stick a fork in me. I'm done. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up, Adrian?
No, I think I'm done too. Just a real pleasure to be back again for a second week. And
it's a pleasure to have you back.
Fresh gang for a third.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be hearing more of you in the coming weeks as Mr. Dawes continues to muck around on stage, doing his evening job, as he puts it. But we'll see you back here very soon in future weeks. Might be Bob next week, might be you. To be honest, I don't know either, but I probably should find out.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and
not the other one.
Produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beisch. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.